Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second episode of the Green Shift podcast, where we are going to know more about critical minerals and its role in achieving just development in Africa with our guest Adil. Adil is a PhD candidate for London School of Economics, and his main interest area is in critical raw materials and in achieving sustainable development, particularly in Africa. And he gets a wide experience and gets into different uh, countries. So I cannot tell you all about Adil. So Adil, please tell us more about yourself and your current projects and what you've been up to.
Okay, first of all, thank you, Salma. It's good to be speaking to you, and thank you so much for the invitation to join your Green Shifts podcast. I'm glad to be here. So, my name is Adil Said. I'm a doctoral researcher in economic geography at the LSE Department of Geography and Environment in the UK, and I'm also a visiting research fellow at the Department of Civil Mining and Process Engineering at the Namibia University of Science and Technology. Um, by background, I'm actually an urban planner and economic development specialist. I did my bachelor's at University College London and a master's at the London School of Economics. My current research focuses on critical raw materials and their role in sustainable African development policy, for instance. And it covers a whole range of things from the resource curse to what's going on at the moment in terms of how we utilize natural resources for developmental kind of purposes. And this has been my focus of my latest project, focusing on the case of Namibia specifically, where I happened to come across the work of DDE and others in the geospatial sciences and geosciences.
Okay. So that's really wonderful. And yeah, we all know that the role of critical raw material, in particularly in this era of energy transition, and Africa is looking forward to make use of its critical raw material. And I guess it all comes to the challenge of governance. So just tell us about the governance and more aspects of governing critical raw materials.
I think that's a really great question, Salma. So over the last probably 20 years, etc., the world has been experiencing a shift from government to governance. So in the traditional view of government, we have a top-down hierarchical process in which it is states, that is the government, that is responsible for all elements of policy and decision making almost unilaterally, right? So they're the ones who have to use public money to do all sorts of kinds of things. But this has been a sufficient but not adequate kind of way of doing things, because actually we have seen the rise of non-state actors. It might be civil society, but also professionals and others who have become a more and more important part of the discussion about how we do things. And that's what we call governance. This kind of decentralized kind of system in which we bring together different stakeholders and different voices that have different perspectives, and each might have a different role or responsibility. This isn't to diminish the role of government, but simply to say that government making decisions by itself might not work effectively, etc. And the point here is that it's not just about efficiency or how productive things are. It's also about equity and making sure that decisions that are ultimately arrived at, or policies that are implemented with the best interests of society as a whole.
Yeah, and I think that the engagement of different stakeholders. So as academics or as a researcher, we've got role to play in achieving this by informing government and telling them our perspective from geological perspective or from geographical perspective. So we always can add more information for governance, and we need to communicate with government. So that's really great. But I was always like wondering. What is the difference between management and governance, and it is all about you know auditing or just I was want to know more about. I've always hearing the term resource governance and resource management, so just highlight on that.
Yeah, another really good question. So management is more about the process, right? So it's about the technical way in which we actually go about um, kind of looking after our natural resources, whereas governance is more about the equitability, the accountability, etc., in the decision making process, right? So this isn't something that is confined just to the area of natural resources. We often talk about land and natural resources. So you have a whole field of inquiry that is land and natural resource management or land management, as we call it, which is all about how do we make the best decisions in terms of managing these kind of natural resources. Um, in terms of resource governance, this is about the broader question about what do we do with our natural resources, who do we include in the discussion, etc., and what kind of society we ultimately want as a whole. I would say that's the differentiation.
Okay, so that's really great to know about it. Yeah, as you've mentioned that the problem is getting more complex. We've already we need to manage the resources. After that, in the era of energy transition, I think that will add more factors to the equation, and at the same time, climate change, the reduction of greenhouse gases. So I guess all these add more factors to the equation and gets more complex. So yeah, and poverty at the same time. Yeah, here I've always noticed that here is Africa, for example, is despite its very resource, full of resources, but it's not it's still living poverty. So how that happened? Why resource extraction or mineral extraction, and its relation to poverty? So how that happened, and what should be done to avoid this?
Yeah. So what we're talking about here is what we call the resource curse hypothesis. So close to 30 years ago now, a scholar named Richard Orty wrote quite a famous set of works that talked about the fact that countries with natural resource wealth or resource abundance actually were experiencing worse development outcomes than those that didn't have these natural resources. And he questioned why that might be the case, that we have this inverse correlation between natural resource wealth and GDP, for instance. And there were two sides of this. One is kind of the lack of good governance, the kind of problems in terms of management of these natural resources, and the fact that you might have inefficiencies in the system or exploitation of natural resources so that it only benefits a few. But the other side is what we call the Dutch disease and other parts of this, which are really to do with the incentives for investment, right? If you have an economy like in Sudan or in Namibia or even Rwanda or others that have high natural resource wealth, investment goes into those primary sectors and might crowd out other elements of the industry, etc. So a lot of countries don't develop necessarily the manufacturing or the other capabilities that you might need to progress along a development ladder, for instance. Now, we also need to bear in mind that this sits in a wider context where economists and development scholars have been talking about the shift in the global development landscape and the reduction in opportunities for developing countries to take advantage of the traditional way of doing things. So this is what the economist scholar Hajin Chang calls kicking away the ladder, for instance. So basically, it's about the fact that the pathways to development are changing, and we also need to think about new ways of doing things. And the resource curse might not be an absolute. It's actually very much context dependent. You take countries in the Middle East, or you take countries like Norway or others that actually have lots of oil well, lots of things, but they're rich countries because of the way that they've been able to harness those resources and are now thinking about developing higher tech and attracting more advantageous sectors beyond just the natural resource wealth.
Yeah, I think when you were talking, I was analyzing the case of country like mine, where almost there was the agriculture, and the agriculture was very developed, and just because of the subsidies and of oil and gas sector just become more flourished, then they become like less focused on agriculture, and all focus just shift to extraction industries. So that really happen all the time in African countries. So yeah, I guess we as a youth, we as you mentioned, we need to learn more about new technologies and how to do new things, as you've been mentioning. But let me get into different perspective. What is poverty actually? Because I'm always thinking of poverty and urbanization are linked to each other. So if it's being poverty means like having being a non-poverty, non-poverty is all about urbanization, or what does poverty mean in, if you look into in depth of the term poverty?
Yeah, so poverty is actually um, it can be measured in different ways. It's actually having an income below a certain threshold, or it could be proportionate to your population. You have an income that is what is it, in the lowest percentile, etc., or thereabouts. So for example, we talk about having to live below $2 a day or $1 a day as being some of the measures of absolute poverty, for instance. And in terms of its link to urbanization, um, well, rapid urbanization is one of the global phenomena that we're facing right now, with people moving from rural areas to urban areas to cities, um, and looking for new jobs, new opportunities, and new livelihoods. But the problem being that cities are not able to cope with the influx of new populations, etc., or afford them those basic services, leading to intractable, supposedly, challenges that are being faced, whether it be to do with inequality or whether it be to do with having access to basic water, sanitation, health services. So this is something that I saw firsthand when I was working in Monrovia, Liberia, among the slum communities there, where they're facing the dual threat of climate change and its impacts, but also uh, facing this challenge of how do they cope with post-conflict and recovering from civil war, for instance.
Yeah, I think all these things, like each one of these factors accelerate other. So you've been mentioned that the main reason for people is to travel to cities is because they are looking for the services. So when it comes to if the minerals managed very well, so there should be like local development around the mine, and ways that can create job opportunities and developing like the downstream of the job creation, as you've mentioned. So all these things can be, making the stress less on the cities. So again, all these things are working together. So looking back to what we've been start with, it's a critical mineral. So can you name these critical minerals and the distribution in Africa? What are those critical minerals that we as an African need to focus on?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to note is that the term critical minerals is still very much up for discussion at the moment, meaning we've only just had the first African Ministerial Conference on the Environment held in Addis Ababa in August, which talked about an African definition of critical minerals. Typically, what we're seeing is that developed countries are the ones that are taking the initiative to say these are critical to our economies. It's things like cobalt, lithium, tin, tungsten, tantalum, others that are part of the industrial metal base, but also specialty metals, and actually form part of technological value chains, and also inputs, as we've increasingly realized, into renewable energy technologies. So critical minerals in and of themselves are unevenly distributed across African countries. Some countries, like the Democratic Republic of Congo or Rwanda, or even Zambia and Zimbabwe, and have a lot of these critical minerals. Others have a lot, but not as much as we see in other places like Namibia. But they face the same kinds of challenges in terms of how do we manage these resources. And one of the things that I was interested in early on in my research was the link, as has been discussed, between mining and conflict, right? So, does the mining for these natural resources actually lead to kind of conflict outcomes across African countries? And this is an important question because in the early 2000s and subsequently, the European Union, other developed countries like the US, talked about conflict minerals. So these were defined as being tin, tungsten, tantalum, and gold, but also others like cobalt, etc., particularly mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which were associated with very specific instances of conflict and violence, etc. And what my research points out is that it's not simply the minerals themselves that give rise to this conflict. It's actually to do with the resource governance, as we already might have suspected beforehand, because it's only the interaction of these minerals with artisanal small scale mining practices that are not properly managed or are very hard to kind of regulate that leads to these worse kind of outcomes. And therefore we need to think more carefully about how we do mining across the continent and pay specific attention to the most marginalized and vulnerable communities that are dependent on these natural resources directly for their livelihood.
Okay, that's really great. So I was questioning that, as you mentioned, there is some country of already have a reserve, a great reserve of these kind of minerals, but maybe there is some countries that they did not even start search or start quantify the amount of those minerals. So it's all about research. So I was thinking of country like Sudan. If we start really, I don't have an idea if there is specific research that have been done to quantify those deposits or the amount of these minerals, which are very critical in the future, and there will be a great demand. And those specific kind of minerals uh, definitely in the future will create the greatest income, which can help to elevate poverty and making that development happen. So that's one of the basic things that I wanted to share with my audience is to know that what needs to be mined, what needs to start focusing on. So thanks for telling that. So and what's happening, you share with us what's happening around Africa as well, so we can learn from that. I guess there is a lot of things to discuss, but we've come to the end of episode, and I think that's very rapidly. Sorry. I hope that we can have another one. So, just if you have any thoughts or any information that you wanted to add, or any messages you wanted to share with you.
Yeah, thanks, Salma. I really appreciate the opportunity to have spoken to you, and I hope that this conversation is useful to your viewers. I think I'd like to end on a particular note, which is that those who are young geoscience professionals can work in any number of sectors across government, academia, industry, research, and also in civil society space. And this is something that I saw in my work in Namibia, but also elsewhere, where geological professionals can do not only technical things with industry, etc., but we also need to fill the gaps. And in Namibia, I learned that people like yourself, who are geoscience communication specialists, or others who are in the financial space, financial geoscientists, or geoscientists who are advisors to policymakers, right? Thinking about how we communicate, how we understand, and thinking about the public discourse that we have about natural resource wealth. That's a direction that I would encourage all of your listeners to think about, and this kind of advocacy and campaigning is really an important part of not only raising the profile of the discipline, but also thinking about its interactions with others in the geography space, in the urban space, and also within economics and other professions and disciplines. So thank you,
Okay.
Selma, for this opportunity.
Yeah. I wanted to end up with a question. So, so is these things like there is a specific MSc program? So these things are we are going to gain them, or audience will gain them through their experiences, or they need to get specialized or having a specific MSc course, PhD course, or how things happen?
There are a lot of emerging programs that are doing interdisciplinary kind of work on sustainable development, etc. I would say that they should look at the Network of Excellence in Land Governance in Africa, which has a lot of programs to do with land and natural resource management, for instance, across the continent. There are also various institutes and various institutions that work on these interconnected kind of dimensions. And I would say that this is also something that is very much learning by doing. So people like yourself giving a voice to young people working in this space, that helps create that conversation that we need going forward, and I think that will really kickstart a broader kind of understanding of the importance of these natural resources for African development purposes. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a message that I wanted to emphasize, and I want the audience to hear it from you. So there is a different MSc program, there is a different project, so you don't have to end up with a conventional way of doing, your MSc or your PhD in the same area of your PhD. So again, thank you for your time, and I really appreciate that you are here. And bye. See you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.